Welcome to the Business Rebellion, the podcast for founders and leaders who know something about the way business is done doesn't sit right anymore. Not because they're failing, but because the model is broken. This is a space for people who are done with burnout culture, done with hustle for the sake of it, and ready to build businesses and lives that actually support them. Today's episode sets the intellectual tone for this entire podcast, because before we talk about teams, systems, property, exits, or anything else, we need to talk about wealth. Not hustle first wealth, not one day I'll slow down wealth, but wealth that's designed alongside your business, not postponed until you're exhausted. This is wealth before hustle. My guest today is Adam Drinkwater, Head of Advice at Treysta Wealth. Adam's passion and purpose are centered around helping people live and achieve their best financial lives, replacing financial uncertainty with genuine financial confidence. As Head of Advice, Adam leads a team of advisors focused on delivering high-quality, forward-thinking advice, while also overseeing the strategic direction and performance of the advice function as a whole. What I really appreciate about his role is that it sits at the intersection of people, strategy, and long-term thinking, not just numbers. Alongside that leadership role, Adam still works directly with clients across a wide range of lifestyle and financial situations. He brings a deeply empathetic approach, paired with strong technical expertise developed over many years in the financial services industry. Treysta has been helping people build financial confidence for over 30 years, guided by a simple but powerful belief that a better life comes from clarity around what and who truly matters and using your resources in a way that supports that. Adam's work is about helping people make better financial decisions so they can build a life and a business that actually feels sustainable. Adam, I'm really glad to have you here to open the Business Rebellion.
Thanks, Kerrie. Absolute pleasure to be here. I'm excited about what we're about to chat about.
Yes, I am very excited too. So to start us off, for people meeting you for the first time, what does actually Head of Advice really mean in practice?
Yeah, you probably gave it a pretty good rundown at the start of this, but maybe what I do in a week is a good way of doing this. So, like day to day, obviously, I do advice work with clients directly. So, part of my role here is to do all the things we're about to talk about. And then beyond that, the head of advice function of that is ensuring that everyone across our advice team is doing things in the same way that I probably would like them to be done or we think is best practice. So ensuring that all of our clients get the same experience, that we're all trying to do things in the right way. We're adhering to the best practices that we put in place. And then in terms of concentrating on the business or advice as a general function, how can we innovate that? How do we make sure we're being progressive? How do we ensure that we're staying on top and we're kind of being an industry leader in what we do? So my world kind of works in a couple of ways in a given period of time. But that's the exciting part of it. And I think in the context of our conversation today, as a business owner, like they're the parts of my world that I have to spend time on and actually really enjoy and excite me. So I'm pretty well placed, I think, to have this conversation.
That's excellent. So what kind of business owners usually come to you after usually they've been working too hard for too long?
Yeah. I also have a mixture of business owners, and so there's no specific kind of industry. But in terms of the types that turn up at the door or those that reach out, there's often a trigger point, and this is not specific to business owners either. I'd say this about a lot of people. They either something's happened or something's prompted them, and they've kind of hit a bit of a fork in the road. And for business owners, a lot of the time that can be had their head in the business or worked really hard for a long period of time and just come a bit disenchanted. Like the business is going really well, but why are they not happy about it? Or the business isn't going as well as they thought and they don't know what to do about it. You know, a lot of business owners probably get home exhausted at the end of the day and they think, our business is going to plan. Why doesn't it feel like that's transferring into my personal world? So there's probably that fork in the road, that moment where people kind of think something's not really adding up here. You know, if I asked a business owner, how the outcomes of their business are facilitating their best life in their personal world, and they can't articulate that or they can't tell me, that's probably another telltale sign if I'm chatting to someone. Yes, it's people who get to that point where there's a bit of a, the best probably thing I could say is there's a scratch to itch. Like they're kind of a bit frustrated. They don't know why. They feel like something is not quite working as it should be. They need to understand what are they not seeing or what are they not doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So a belief that I see constantly is that wealth comes after years of grinding. That you push now, design later. And so from what you see, where does that belief kind of go wrong, and how do you differentiate between building income and actual wealth?
Yeah, so I think I don't think that's a truism for everyone, because a lot of the way that we think about wealth or we think about behavior, whether it's business or personally, comes from norms or it comes from influences. So it could be social, it could be cultural, it could be family. I don't think there's ever a point where it's too early to start. And if you consume a lot of information or kind of people that have done well in certain spaces like this, a lot of them will tell you that they just started small and they carried on doing things. You can use analogies about planting a seed that grows into a tree. But a lot of the time, people have a real need for instant gratification. And so if they can't do something now that suddenly is a success instantly, or they can't get the benefits or the wealth out of it, then why should I do it? Or, it doesn't seem to be the way to do it, or there's a get rich quick scheme going on somewhere else. So a lot of people probably feel like, it's got to be done quickly. And they don't really have the patience to understand how good things come over time and from design and going through things that way. The other risk around that is that if you've grinded for years, and you could be doing better than you think, but you don't have a rational way to approach that. So a lot of people are led by biases or kind of ways of thinking about things that they may not even be aware of. So, social norms I talked about, they go to school and everyone tells them about how they've got this, that, and the other, new cars, new kitchens, or, they look down their street and their neighbors have got certain things, and that's their way of thinking, I'm not getting anywhere. Whereas in reality, if they sat down and actually went through it properly with somebody, from a behavioral sense or a psychological sense, and thought about what truly is important to them or what is value or what is wealth, because wealth is not just material, it's personal, and it's it's behavioral, psychological. Maybe they are doing okay. Like maybe the years of grind is actually leading to somewhere that they can use and something that they can actually start to materialize in the things that are important to them, not the things that are important to others, that they're using as markers. So it's definitely never too early to start. Baby steps at the start of things and just chipping away. We'll talk later about the differences around things like how compounding works or how things grow like a snowball over time. But nobody starts usually with this massive capacity to do things, unless you've been fortunate and got some huge windfall of money. Everyone has to start somewhere. We do it in our careers. We do it as people, as we learn and grow over time. So it's definitely never too early. There's probably risks that we'll chat about later in leaving it too late.
Yeah, I love the whole never too early, because like my eldest son at the moment is actually starting to get ready to go to work and do all those things. And I've already told him got to put money aside to do this. We're going to set you up with like a raise account, and you just, even if it's only $10, right? Every time you get paid $10 it's something little. It gets the habit early. So I wish someone had kind of got me started that early. Do you know what I mean? And he's only 16.
Yeah. I mean, ironically, the reason I do this is my nana. I remember when I was a kid, and we had those little learnings early on. They'd put savings accounts and chip money away, and it just fascinated me. And so yeah, of kind of small things, big things grow, and I think so much of that is behavior. We'll talk a lot today about behavior, and think of some of the concepts around wealth per se. So much of it is behavioral rather than material or capital driven, like market driven. So you could have access to the best investments in the world, or you could have access to good streams of income. But if your behavior is not correct around it, you'll make nothing of it. And that's true in the way people operate businesses as well. So I think that will be a theme as we chat through this, no doubt.
Yes, I have no doubt. So obviously you come across multiple business owners that are earning very good money.
Hmm.
But why doesn't more revenue automatically create security or freedom? And what kind of patterns do you see in the high earning founders who still
Yeah.
feel financially on edge?
Yeah. So I suppose if you think business world for a second, revenue is not profit. So it's very easy to create or to go out and say, I'm going to create more revenue. I'll generate more streams that can give the business more money. But that doesn't necessarily translate into profit, EBITDA, net whatever you look at. So inside of a business itself, that can often be a flaw. People just get their heads and concentrate on continuing to try and grow revenue, but they don't know how to scale. So what that means is a lot of the time they add more noise during the process, they add more expense during the process, and really all of the revenue that gets chewed up in a lot of the expense that they've created at the same time, unfortunately. The flow and effect, of course, to that is that there is less money then for them to draw out to their own world to try and create wealth. So often some of the biggest challenges here are where you'll get business owners that their business is a cash cow and they're creating income. Even if they draw that income, they'll spend it. So, like understanding how a business operates and revenue is not equal to profit, it's not equal to what you can draw out as an owner. And then understanding how that flows into personal world and other assets that you can build at the same time is quite important. So that concept of income versus wealth being two different things is quite an important thing to understand. Income, without doubt, generates the ability for people to do things. By and large, like I said, unless previously you've received a large sum of money somewhere, we all have to generate income to give ourselves the ability to do things. So that's the driver. But if you just rely on your income all the time and you're not creating other things that help you grow wealth, it's really quite difficult to achieve long-term growth in terms of financial wealth. So if you think of the concepts of it, most people buy a house or a lot of people own a house. Think how super funds work as well. And so if you look at just some of the basic numbers around these types of things, if you pick a median property price in Sydney over 10 years, it's grown by about 100%. That's a pretty big number, right? Over 10 years.
It's huge.
It's huge. If you went and looked at the stock market and said over 10 years, if you reinvested the dividends, how much does it grow over 10 years? That number's about 150%, right? So these are averages and these are just a guideline. But if you look at what the average income increase is over 10 years, is about 30%, 35%. That is a heck of a lot lower than the two numbers I've just referenced. So on the pure maths of numbers, or the pure way that numbers work in terms of income and assets, that is a really important reference point to understand. There is then, of course, the behavioral part of how people treat income. So lots of people spend what they receive. And I think, we may touch on it later, but it's one of the biggest areas that I see. I deal with clients and people that earn lots of different levels of money. And so often people go up in a pay grade or their business starts to provide more money, they can draw more money, and they just up their lifestyle to meet it. They get the nicer car, they get the bigger house, they go on the more holidays. And please do not get me wrong, these things are really important. So earlier when I mentioned the difference between financial, material wealth and personal, it is so important to get the balance right. It's no good if you're flogging yourself in business, but you're not getting your holidays. It's no good if you're flogging yourself in business, but you're not spending time with the kids. So not everything is about 30 years' time. It's about understanding the balance and what you need to achieve both. So income is a big driver of that, but it cannot be the sole driver.
So it's interesting that you talk about those other features as well, because I think it gets overlooked. There's a lot of hype out there that we need to chase that financial wealth side of things, but we also need to accept the fact that wealth means different things to different people. So when we're going through those phases, it's great to kind of have someone who understands both.
That most of us think about.
No,
Like it's pretty rare that we sit down on a Thursday night on the couch and think about these things, right? It just doesn't happen. And for most people that are really busy, and particularly business owners, and this is one of the challenges of business owners, you sometimes don't allow yourself the time to think about it. And in that point earlier, one of the things that we've spent years now around is psychology of money. and I'll talk, like I said, like around behaviors. And one of them is actually understanding what is wealth to a person, what is important to you. So I work with some people that do not require big amounts of money in the future. They don't like flash cars, or they don't like big houses. They don't have kids. Right? There's all these different kind of ways that life creates itself for people. And so what's right for one person is completely different for another. But because we're all surrounded by friends and families, and we all come from somewhere, there are biases and norms that are kind of instilled in us over time that make us think that wealth is one thing or another. So, we have specific exercises and engagements that we take people through, some of them purely psychological, not even talking about money yet. And it's designed to help them think about these things. So what is your relationship with money? Where does that come from? Did you have an upbringing in a really wealthy family and therefore you're quite carefree about it? Too carefree to make something good happen? Did you grow up in a background where you never had any money, therefore you are completely risk averse, you cannot release the smallest amount that you get that won't allow you to grow? So these things are really important rather than just thinking about have to have a certain amount of money in X amount of years' time. There's a really kind of good process and good exercise and good time to spend on understanding that about yourself as a person before you start to think about how you do all of these things, whether it's how your business operates, how you use income, which assets you have. If you do all of that the wrong way around, you don't really have good success markers, and you're not really making rational decisions from a framework that relates back to your own values. You're just making them because someone told you that having X amount of money when you're 60 is the right number.
Yep.
It just doesn't work that way.
So, what kind of role do advisors play in those kind of advice and expertise? Like, some business owners are still seeing advice as an expense rather than leverage. So it'd be good to kind of tell everyone why it's important to invest.
Yeah. So, I mean, probably the answer to that is all the other questions or things we've talked about, right? So,
Yeah.
if when you're a business owner, you obviously it can be slightly different to, or like quite different to when you're, say, a salaried employee, in so much as you can be running at 100 mile an hour all the time. You can be here, there, and everywhere. You don't allow yourself the time to think about things. There's things like the ostrich effect where you just bury your head in the sand and you're just trying to get through like dot to dot. So a lot of the time you're only left with your own thoughts or abilities to try and do things. And sometimes that will be incredibly reactive and not proactive in any way whatsoever. So advisory services or working with advisors, and don't forget, advice or advisory service comes in lots of different ways, right? So your accountant, for example, is a form of advice to you as a business owner. And most good advisors have a wealth of experience either in the subject matter, so lots will be business owners or business partners like myself, or they've worked with lots of you. They've worked with 100 business owners and they've seen 100 things go right and 100 things go wrong. So they have a really good level of experience they can offer to help you start to see things that you don't otherwise see. And they also have a wonderful technical expertise, right? This is what we spend our life doing. We train to a high level, we gain lots of experience, we go off and study more, we research. And so we see lots of different things that a business owner won't, because a business owner is probably focused on what their business does. And so if your business is a specialist in logistics, you're probably a specialist in logistics. You're probably not a specialist in how the business creates wealth or how you take that out of your business. Advisory, in whichever format you need it, is hugely powerful from that regard. The other point and the other kind of area that comes into this is in business, you usually have a business plan. Or I hope you do. And you need one personally as well, because if you don't, how do you know what's going on in the business, if that's successful or not, if you're able to take money out? Why do you even need to? Do you need money outside in your own world? Do you not? So you need to have someone that's helping you have a framework and have a plan and see things that are not from your perspective and keep you accountable to doing things. So most people that I work with, one of the big values they would tell you that we offer them is the peace of mind and the ability for them to focus on what is most important to them, but someone to keep them accountable and someone to be speaking to and have a sounding board and ask for advice because they haven't been through a certain part of this phase before, or they haven't come across this challenge before. And so they're really big parts of it. The other part would be that as individuals, we all operate in a certain way and we all have biases and we all have blind spots. And so obviously in my world, like one of the things that I think has improved a lot over the years in advisory is acknowledgement that psychology and behavior is critical to success. And that means that we have a wonderful awareness of biases and blind spots that we can all have. And I'll talk about a few common ones of business owners later. But it means that when I'm speaking to somebody and they're explaining something to me, I'm already seeing things that they're not seeing. And it's so critical to have someone that tells you those types of things or helps you with those types of things. And this is not dissimilar to having a great mentor. And this can apply to your personal world as well. You can speak to friends about things because you don't, and they'll say, hey, I don't know if you've noticed this. So those types of things are all really, really critical when you think about how to leverage advice rather than try and do something on your own. There's so much that you can take from it. And ultimately, like most things, that should add a value. So if I'm going to use advice or I'm going to receive advisory services, I must get value out of this. I must be improving. And I think that the areas I've just spoken about in terms of expertise, experience, being able to see personal traits, behaviors, help people do things differently, allows them to do the thing that is most important in their world. And that might be growing the business, growing more income. If that's the driver, then great. You go ahead and do it at a far greater level than you otherwise could do. And that's a huge value.
Yeah, that's massive. And it kind of makes you think and that maybe it actually costs more by delaying getting this advice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, opportunity cost is a huge thing, and it's quite hard to articulate it if you don't know what it is. So, everyone knows what opportunity cost is as a concept. Obviously, it's the cost of not doing something, but you don't know what the not doing is. So a lot of and this is fair, a lot of the time people don't thoroughly understand advice because they've never explored it. Okay, so they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what I could tell them over the course of a year, and that's perfectly fine because we're all consumers of goods and services and we don't know what lots of them do until we go off and find out. So you probably have subscriptions for things or do things during the week like I do as a consumer. And at some point I didn't know what it was, but somebody told me about it or I went off and learned because I had a need. It's no different in terms of advice that you can get. So you have to kind of be aware that there is things that you won't know about. There's an opportunity cost to not exploring things.
Yeah, it's a shame because obviously you only realise that opportunity cost in hindsight, right? It's always the way.
Sometimes, yeah.
Unless someone else keeps in your ear about it, which is helpful sometimes.
And that's the thing, like I said, either, a lot of the time people will turn up at my doorstep or reach out to me because either something's happened. And often a driver of that is they've got into a problem or they've got into a situation they need to get out of or they didn't foresee happening. One of the less preferential ways that people would reach out because I'd rather they reached out way ahead of that and never have gotten to that point. But there are other situations where I see a lot of people reach out when something happens to a peer or a family member that they don't want to happen to themselves. A family member gets sick and they think, well, crack, I never thought about this. But if I suddenly get really, like terminally ill, like I have a serious illness, I'm trying to run a business. I've got 10 staff that rely on me. Like, who's going to do all of this stuff? I never even thought about this. So they see that in their world all of a sudden and it kind of jolts them into activity. So yeah, they are the kind of prompts and we're all like that, right? We all go off and reach something because there's a prompt at some point to go and do it.
Businesses are service-based businesses and they've got, small to medium-sized teams and they carry that personal responsibility that you just mentioned. So how does that really change and how should they be thinking about wealth and what risks are they underestimating?
Yeah, it's really hard when you're, if you've got a team and if you are responsible for all of that, it's a huge weight on your shoulders. And part of that then, or part of the kind of interesting conundrum that starts to throw up is, when you're looking at your business and you're looking at the team you're looking after, how do you align that with what's good for you as well? Because there's different ends of the spectrum, right? You could be, and I suspect not many listeners are, but there's plenty of people out there that will just take everything out of the business they can for themselves because they want to serve a great life for whatever reason that may be. And that really doesn't leave a lot left inside the business. And that could be either from a perspective of personal exertion and output that they can give to their team, or the way they look after them financially, or the business they've built so it's a great workplace to work in. Or the other end of the spectrum is true, and they're just so selfless that they think so passionately about the business and the team that it feels really guilty for them to take profit out of the business or money out of the business to look after themselves. So getting the balance of that is incredibly important. And for most people, that's a really hard thing to do individually because, like I said, you are driven by a way of thinking yourself. So you're either the selfish person or the selfless person. There's, of course, the nice balance in the middle. But lots of people are probably geared one way or another somehow, either subconsciously or not. And having an independent person sit there and be able to see that and help you then break through how you solve it can be incredibly helpful. So if you think of the risk of being over attributed to your business, I'm looking at that person that's asking me why they don't have any personal assets, or why they're not growing, or why they don't think they can ever retire. And a lot of the time it's because behaviorally, I can see that they're dedicating themselves solely to those people and not to themselves. And it might also be that they just don't have any planning or framework to be able to visually see that. So a lot of the time we all think differently. And if you think about the way that we all have concepts in our head, or the way we have theories in our head, or the way we think about things ourselves, some of us just visualize things and think, oh, that's the way it's going to work, when it might be completely wrong. Like, irrationality is a huge part of the way we don't make decisions very well as humans. And so I spend a lot of time with people methodically going through with them what they need to do in their own worlds, and then how that basically is facilitated by income they earn or their business revenue generation. So if you and I spend a lot of time understanding what's truly valuable to you as a person, and then starting to put a financial framework around that in terms of what you need to build to serve that for your life. So it could be, how many assets do I need? How much do I need to put away every month? When am I going to be able to do things at certain timeframes? When you start to know all of those things, you then know the answers to what you need to do in the business. So you know that you have to pull X amount out every month to satisfy all those things. And by doing that, you can see that that's actually okay in the business, because you're not draining it of everything. You're looking after your people, and your responsibility feels okay. You don't feel like you're not doing the right thing. So having that association between the two is very useful in allowing you to concentrate the right on the business, handle those responsibilities of looking after others, and not really making decisions irrationally, or just because you think it's the right thing to do, or someone said it's the right thing to do. Like, methodically and strategically, how are you doing that, and building a framework for your decision making so it's proactive, it's not reactive.
Yeah, I like that, because I always find that clarity and calm really makes decision making easy. So when you've got that plan, whether it's wealth or business, it doesn't matter where your plan is in life. As soon as you have that plan with the clarity and the calm around it, the decisions are just simple.
Yeah, and lots of success I see comes from proactivity and being able to make decisions proactively. Now, look, don't get me wrong, most of us get put in a situation at some point where we've got to react, or things get thrown up that we didn't foresee. Even the best planning can't foresee everything. There's factors that go on around us that are beyond our control, whether that's economic or market or things that happen in your business. But if you're constantly chasing your tail, and that's the only way you can deal with those things when they come up, you really have very little opportunity or chance to be doing all of the things I've talked about, and be able to make decisions rationally, and know how you can take yourself out of the situation to deal with it and not leave chaos in the background. So it really is an important part of the way you approach responsibility and risk as a business owner, and decision making, and in turn the way you're able to operate as a person, so not being stressed all the time and not being the person that's got to do everything. You become a decision maker.
Yeah, well, the only way to scale is to leave chaos behind, right?
Mm.
So for someone listening who feels like they've left wealth planning too late, as some may feel, what would you want them to hear and know right now?
Um, Look, I don't think there's ever a too late per se. I mean, I'm probably pushing it there when you're reaching out to me in your 80s. You're probably at a long point, but um,
With just
it,
a pension.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I was listening to one of your other podcast episodes, with one of my good friends, and something he kept referring to is just giving it a go. It's not dissimilar in what we're talking about here. Okay, so it's never too late to do something around this space, but a lot of the time it's getting people to do it. So, like one of my favorite sayings is the heaviest weight at the gym is the front door. I think
Oh
it's
my
such a
God,
truism
it so
because
is.
just getting someone there, like once you're in, you're doing what you need to do. Now that's not through people's fault sometimes because sometimes it feels like you've done something for so long that backtracking's hard. Sometimes there's a real difficulty in terms of pride and ego, and a lot of business owners put so much heart and soul into things. They don't want to stick their hand up and say, "Oh, I
I
think I
need
should
help.
have done something different a few years ago here," or "I need help." Ability is one of the biggest factors that help people succeed, I see in our space. The ability to say they don't know something, the ability to ask questions and not be worried about looking silly by asking a question, the ability to put their hand up and say, maybe I haven't been doing this the best way, or maybe I've left it too late. Um, but like there's never too late in theory because the opportunity cost of not doing it is carrying on doing the same thing that is essentially creating the problems. Yeah, and you don't know, like a lot of the difficulty there is not knowing what you don't know, like I said. So you could come into me and I'll say, hey, this is not too late at all. Like you've got plenty of resource to use it. You've got plenty of time. You're just not thinking about it in the way that I look at it. Because again, your factors have come from peer, social, history, and you've, a lot of people clutch to bits of information that comes at them and it may not be the best information to use to make a rational decision or a judgment of is it too late or not. So, like I think more often than not, doing something is better than not doing something, right? And that doesn't matter if lots of people come to me a few years before they want to retire. They've been doing something for 30 years. Like, would it have been better if they'd have come to me 30 years ago? For sure. Is it better they've come to me now rather than in 3 years when they're about to retire? Absolutely. So I don't think there's any harm in having a conversation and finding out the actual answer to that question for people rather than assuming it.
Mm. And what's the kind of mindset shift that generally makes a difference, especially in the first conversation?
I think if you're from a business owner perspective, and even from a personal perspective, it's starting to understand that you have control of your situation, or you can. And a lot of people will arrive because they think they don't have control, or they think they can't control the outcomes. And it's a bit like what you talked about earlier, where when you're a business owner or like a really busy employee, or you're really busy with your family life, there's this kind of ability just to have your head down all the time. You're just grinding through things. I was talking to one of my colleagues earlier. We've both got young kids, and we are talking about how you just get through tasks. You go to work, you get home, you deal with the kids, you do things. Yeah, and so sometimes you don't have the ability to look up, and you don't have the time to look up, and also you don't think you can control a situation because you're in it, and your mindset isn't allowing you to see that, and that's perfectly fine. Right? It happens to everyone. So the mind shift is really letting somebody understand for themselves that they can control this. And we do that in lots of different ways. Sometimes you can do it conversationally, sometimes I'll do it visually. It's amazing the amount of times that someone will come in and say to me, like, I think I've left it too late, or I'm in a mess. I don't think I'm going to be able to retire. And I can show them something visually that actually allows them to see how they can do it. It could be a graph that shows them how their money ends up in 10 years if we just make a series of changes. It could be opening their mind up a little bit to the ways that they can do things over future years that relate back to what they actually feel would success would be rather than what everyone else is telling them. So the mind shift is really starting to understand that you are a decision maker, you can control. And people could have been that in the past, but it's just that, sometimes you get so drawn up in what you're doing or what people are telling you. These days, influencing comes from everywhere. Everyone has social media, everyone's an expert on social media. Everyone listens to people in the gym changing rooms that are apparently the experts.
And the
And they go
barbecue,
away.
don't forget those.
Yeah, they go away, and whether they conscientiously believe it or not, or whether it's somewhere stuck in their head because they didn't realize they've digested it, it has an influence. And a lot of the time, that means that people that make their decisions based on those things could be completely incorrect. And so,
Do you find that some of the tweaks that you're talking about when they come to you, especially when they're feeling it's too late, you find often that the tweaks that you recommend actually aren't that big or scary?
yeah, there can be. And a lot of the time, it can be just changing the way people do things. It could be that they're doing the right things, but they're not doing them in the right way. And I talked before about behavioral impact. So if you think about the way that you earn money, if a lot of the time, if somebody came into me and said, look, I earn a really good income, I think I should be able to save, should be able to create wealth, just isn't happening. I don't have the capacity to save because I'll say, so they'll say, well, we just spend everything we've got. We don't really have we can't save. People don't like doing budgets. Budgets aren't really fun. A lot of the time for people in personal world, they don't work very well. It's more behavioral in terms of, if I said to somebody, right, well, I want you've got to find $5,000 at the end of every month now. We've got to put it into these assets. That's the way you're going to grow your wealth. If I ask them to do it, the chances of them doing it are probably incredibly slim. Not because they don't want to, but because of the method and the way that I'm asking them to do it. If I took it off them at the start of their pay, I deducted it from their pay. Can't not have power to control everyone's pay, but you can do these things. The choice is gone. You've done it. All right. So think of the way that you pay tax or the way that you pay your mortgage. You're not choosing to do it. Someone's taking it off you. It's not your choice. You've just done. And you have to facilitate, you have to have the income to facilitate it. So there are lots of things you can do differently, whether it's strategically or behaviorally, that may mean that you have the capacity to do the things you want to do. You just don't know. Or you're just not aware of methods or strategies. Like I mentioned earlier, part of our job is that we've, over years, worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and you see things that go right, those that do things wrong. And we have a vast knowledge and expertise set to be able to understand what strategies exist. I haven't even gone into things like strategies you can use that don't take your own effort. They take, they're clever strategies. If you think of something that everyone understands, like debt funding a property, the debt does the work for you. How do you do it all? And how do you avoid paying $500,000 in capital gains tax at the end, which completely undoes the benefit of the project? All these things that you're able to do. So lots of it is strategy and lots of it is knowing about those things, and that's our job to do. But a lot of it is then helping people behaviorally make sure they're able to do these things or that they do them. And we don't really work with people where we just have a meeting and tell them these things. I've worked with people for years. They'll pick up the phone, they'll speak to me when things are going on, events happen, surprises come up, nice things happen. And we're constantly ensuring their behavior is going in the right way to facilitate what they've told me are important, and continually reevaluating that, because as we go through our lives and we go through phases of our lives, our values rarely change. As people, our values are often instilled in us by the things that are important to us, but our objectives change and the things that are important within those values change. So when you're younger, you value things, but you go off and chase things in a different way. You go through phases of life. Some people have kids, some people go off and start businesses. And so, you've constantly got to adjust things over time. It's no good in me just saying, well, there's a behavioral change here to make, or I think you should go and do this strategically, and then you'll be good for 20 years. So a lot of that has a really big impact in making sure that people remain true to what they want to do, true to what's going to create success to them, and they're not having to think about it. They're thinking about doing the good stuff or doing the things that matter in their business. They're not sat here thinking, well, I'm talking about this. That's my job for them to do.
That's good to get that out of your head, right? And
Yeah.
give it to someone who's an expert in that space.
Yeah.
Because trying to work it out on your own can sometimes be really disheartening.
Well, absolutely. And look, every business owner that I'm talking to, and you included, you operate a business because people want to use your goods and services because they don't want to do it themselves, or they can't. Right. So what I'm doing is the same as that. It's just, if you understand how to use services and how to use people, it can have a huge impact in what you in turn can do. We talked before about generating income, and especially in businesses. Business is an active asset for people. So active assets will more often than not always have the ability to create way more in terms of income or wealth for people than, say, passive assets like houses and stocks. but only if it's done in the right way. Like if you can focus on it, an active return from active assets usually comes from your own input into it. So it's human capital as opposed to market capital that's changing. But
It's
if you,
not capped either,
yeah,
usually.
yeah, but if you're limiting yourself because you're not using experts around you, or you're not allowing yourself to focus on the things that create that active capital or that active benefit, then you're never really going to get the best out of it. Like I said, you could be a busy fool and run this business, you're working your backside off all the time, and at the end of the day, all the revenue goes to expenses, and at the end, you're thinking, where's all this going?
Right, what am I doing?
Mm.
So, what's one belief that you would love people to unlearn about money and success?
Probably thinking their business is all that they'll need. If we're talking about a kind of a business owner perspective here, so a lot of the time, this happens organically, that when you're a business owner, you have to put a lot of effort into your business. And it's like a love affair almost for a lot of people. You develop an extreme passion and love and attachment for it, and therefore it takes all of your energy and all of your efforts. For the best cases that happen, that could be a phenomenal outcome. The business could be worth lots in the future. It could give you lots of income on the journey, but it also couldn't. And I see a lot of business success from people that have a go, they get stuck in, like they may not be the best at their industry in terms of the acumen they have, or they might not have been the best at school, or they might not have the best money to start this project, but they put in, right, and they put the effort in, and they go at it hard. But of course, the other part to that is assuming that when you do that, that's going to give you this monetary outcome that we all hope exists. And so having the rational thinking to understand that your business can be a great thing, and it can be an ability to unlock serious benefits for your life and wealth for your life. But you've got to understand that there's a lot of things you've got to do around it. You can't just get stuck into there and go on this journey of all in and eggs in one basket and think that it's going to provide the outcomes and solutions you need for everything, because it probably isn't. But you've got to have the passion to stick in there and just understand those things. Your business is a great thing. You wouldn't have started it if it wasn't. If you're getting great help around you, then it's highly likely your business is on a good trajectory. It should be growing, but you've just got to have the presence of mind to understand there is other things that go on around that contribute to your own personal outcome and best position to be in for your life.
It's funny that you mentioned the passion side of it and how it's a really big part. It's that, like a love affair. I really, really relate to that. It's like we've got an additional family member in our household,
Yeah.
having the business here. Like everyone is not involved, but we all talk about it. It takes up time and space, and I've got to do this or whatever it may be. There may be reasons that I don't do other things because of it, but it's also funny in the sense that it's like that extra part of you, and that passion gets you through the tough times.
Yeah, it does. And it's a beautiful thing. You want to do something you're passionate about. You want to do something you believe in. But like all good relationships, I mean, how many talk about romantic movies where the personal relationship has blind spotted everything else around it? It's just having that awareness, and because of this passion and love you build up for it, sometimes there's no real understanding of what good looks like. And so, I could have business owners that I work with where their business is purely an income generator. It's never going to amount to having a value as a business, right? Now, that could be for their personal world perfectly fine. Okay, it's not a rule that your business has to grow to this value for retirement. So I could have a business owner that's single, doesn't have any kids, doesn't have any interest in having kids or a partner. They just want to travel. They love traveling. They don't need a 5-bedroom house because of their lifestyle. They want to lock up and go. They want to have the best life all of their years they can, because retirement could or couldn't come round. Like they don't know what it looks like. So their business and their passion is important because it's going to generate that lifestyle for them now. And the opposite is true of where I could have people that are really okay at the moment in terms of, what they take from the business is fine. But they've got no other assets, or they've got no way of funding retirement that they keep telling me is critical to them in 10 years. So what does good look like in terms of what the passion leads to? Like, you don't have to grow forever in a day. Like, at what point do you understand that your passions led you to the place you wanted to get to? And that's okay. So they're kind of really healthy conversations to have and understand, particularly where, you see business owners that will just keep growing because someone told them they should keep growing. They could have passed the point 2-3 years ago that they needed to get to from the perspective of their personal wealth requirements or their personal lifestyle requirements. And while they're busily now doing this, they're adding more stress, more debt, more risk, and it never needed to be there. So it's a really important part of understanding the balance of the passion and love we have is that it does create blind spots. It's the same in our personal world, right?
It's everywhere, right? But it sounds like, wealth is less really about intensity, like, going hard, going fast, but more about intention. So I think that that's a really important thing to probably
Yeah,
touch.
they're not, in some ways, they're not mutually exclusive. But I would say that you need to have the intention before the other. So, as we all know, we can kind of really step up in our speed when it comes to work or business, and that could be to try and create more revenue. It could be self-investing. One of the things I think that gets hugely underestimated is investing in yourself as a person. So, from a human capital perspective, if you upskill yourself or you give yourself the ability to operate in a better space, from could be as a business, you go off and do a leadership course or all these types of things, they give you the ability to create more. Now, some of that is intensity, right? You've kind of got to go through the gears to do it, but none of that exists if you don't have intention. And it's the same method, same things that I've talked about earlier. I could have all these wonderful strategies for you and all these great ideas and all these ways I can help you, but if you don't come see me, like, it's all like there's no benefit to it, right? So it all exists. And that's the difference between understanding the human capital, the human behavior part in the market capital and the other areas that you can access or your business revenue. It will probably all exist for everyone. But unless they have the intent to understand how to get there, you can't get to it. So the intensity's there. You can use intensity as much or as little as you need to get to your outcomes. And you do need to a certain degree. You could have the great intent and come to me, but if you don't have any intensity to do the things we've talked about, you'll never get anywhere. So that's why I was saying they're not mutually exclusive. It's just understanding those helpful steps in allowing you to get there. And it's really different for everyone. We don't all behave in the same way. And I could suggest to you something that sounds absolutely abhorrent, but I think is great for me personally and vice versa. So it's kind of breaking down a person to understand how they work, what their influential factors have been, and then how do you address the ones that they don't currently utilize or the risky factors that they have in their behavior that are preventing them from doing the great.
That's good. Yeah. So to close this out, one question that every founder should ask themselves about wealth.
What is your relationship with money, and can you articulate how it serves your life? So your business, like, can you, as a founder, can you tell me why you do what you do, and can you tell me how you use that to have the life that you really want? I think probably over time, some people learn how to do that or how their relationship with the money that comes from their business works. But I think that's a really good starting place to think about. Can you answer a question like that? Can you tell me why you run your business in terms of how it serves your life? Because most people do it for that reason, right? So are you doing that in the right way?
I really, really do like that, actually. So, Adam, this has been such a grounding way to open this podcast. And what really stands out for me is that wealth isn't just about working harder or waiting longer, it's about making intentional decisions early with the right support around you. So, for anyone listening, this episode isn't a call to hustle less, it's an invitation to think better. Adam, thanks for joining us today and for setting the standard for what this podcast is really about.
It's a pleasure. I hope it's opened some minds and gives people a few opportunities to just ask questions that they never thought about before, and hopefully in turn it allows them to reach out to people and get some better outcomes through great help.
Perfect. So this is the Business Rebellion, and this is what it sounds like to do business differently.